On today's show, the Hawks are in Chicago for a win-or-go-home play-in matchup against the Bulls on Wednesday. We'll get into that game, as well as a crossover with the folks at Locked on Bulls and a little bit of a peek at the Kings draft pick obligation. We'll get into all of that and more coming up.
You are Locked on Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1696 of the Locked on Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you deep into the night here on a Tuesday evening into Wednesday. And I want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, as I always do, to make us your first listen here at Locked on Hawks each and every day. Please check us out and subscribe to the show anywhere you get your podcasts. That includes Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube on the video side. It's been a very busy week on this podcast network, including a Bulls-Hawks preview show that I did on Monday evening and a Tuesday with Jason Pat of Clutch Points and Cash Considerations. That's very much in your feed right now. There's lots of stuff to talk about, beat crazy stuff from previous to that. And today's show is going to kind of be the final preview episode in advance of Wednesday's 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time tip-off in Chicago between the Hawks and the Bulls, with the winner moving on to a game on Friday and the loser going home for the season. Also, at the end of this show, the final segment of this podcast is actually going to be myself and the guys from Locked on Bulls, kind of doing a one-segment mini preview episodes. That's going to be the last thing you hear on this podcast today. Before we get to that, though, plenty to get to when it comes to Hawks Bulls. And also briefly later on in the podcast, I will do a little bit of a check-in on the Kings pick, because Friday might be a Hawks game, but it also is definitely going to be a Kings game. The Hawks have a pretty interesting sort of investment in. So we'll get into that in a second. But we'll start big picture first. The Hawks, of course, play the Bulls for the fourth time this year on Wednesday evening. I will have done some of this preview stuff with Jason, but this is kind of my full-on rundown on today's podcast. Of course, Atlanta won the last game they played. They won by 12 points against Chicago. They still only went 1-2 against the Bulls this season. As we'll get into in a second, the rotations on both sides are very, very banged up right now. Lots of injuries, lots of size concerns on, honestly, both sides of this matchup. And speaking of which, the injury reports are now out. As I talked to Jason yesterday, they were not available. Now they are, as I'm recording very, very late into the evening here. So only 3 players listed for the Hawks on the injury report for Wednesday's game. That's not a huge surprise. 3 guys who are out were always going to be out. It's Jalen Johnson, Onyeka Okongwu, and Saddiq Bey. They are not going to be available in Bey's case for the rest of the season, and in Johnson and Okongwu's case for several more weeks at the very least. So no surprise there. That does mean, though, that Wes Matthews is now off the injury report. He missed the last couple games of the season with a hamstring issue of some kind. That might have been just monitoring him a little bit. He is, of course, an old head on this roster, but he's off the injury report entirely. So I presume he'll be active and ready to go. Also, a reminder here, just another plug here. Also, on the show on Sunday afternoon, I talked about the last game of the season for the Hawks, but also spent about 12 minutes on Beat Krejci. A good reminder here that he is ineligible to play in the playoffs / play-in, as is Seth Lundy, as is Dylan Windler. All those guys who finished the year on 2-way contracts are not eligible to play. So with 3 guys out and 3 guys on 2-way contracts, the Hawks have 12 players available for the game on Wednesday. On the Bulls side, Ayo Dosunmu and Andre Drummond are listed as questionable for the game. They both missed the end of the season for Chicago. There's lots of uncertainty there, but they are 2 key rotation pieces for the Bulls. So that's actually going to be interesting to kind of monitor throughout the day on Wednesday as to whether they will play. All of the updates today were kind of positive on Dosunmu, maybe a little bit more skeptical on Drummond. But Dosunmu, just for everybody that doesn't know this, is a talented kind of defensive-minded guard. Certainly a guy that could bother some of the ball handling for Atlanta in this game. That's one of the strengths of Chicago, is that they have Alex Caruso and Ayo Dosunmu and Javon Carter to kind of all hound opposing guards. And Atlanta, of course, has 2 high-end guards to have Chicago sort of go after in this game. And then Drummond is always interesting. You know, he's a fantastic offensive rebounder. That's always been his calling card in some respects. That's a big thing there. But the big thing for me anyway, beyond that, is that Chicago is just very small without him. Now, yes, they have Vucevic, who has struggled this year quite a bit, but they don't really have a third center. They have Adama Sanogo, who's kind of a rookie, smaller guy. They could be playing Javonte Green. Like it's going to be small for Chicago at this point in time. So both teams, really, the Hawks being without so much size in their own right. In fact, of course, I've said this before, the Hawks are missing 3 of their top 8 players in this game. And that leaves them very, very size challenged. So most listeners will know this already, but without Jalen, Onyeka, and Sadiq, the Hawks will really only have one guy between 6'5" and 6'10" on the active roster, and that is DeAndre Hunter. Everybody else is on the smaller side, like your Wes Matthews, your Bogies, those guys are like 6'5"-ish. And then Mo Gay is 6'11", but Mo Gay, of course, is a rookie who's very raw at this point in time. So rotationally, I got a lot of questions about this, about who's going to play for the Hawks in this game. Number one, Quinn Snyder will never, ever tell you that ahead of time. So this is all a little bit of my reading between the lines and just logic and all that stuff. But they have not revealed this, nor will they reveal this before the game. But there are obviously 5 absolute locks. That's Trey, DeJounte, Bogey, Hunter, and Capella. Those are the 5 remaining guys of the top 8 coming into the year who are available. They might start. I would say probably will start that group together. If not, definitely at least 4 of those guys, I will guarantee you right now will start in Trey, DeJounte, and Hunter, and Capella. I think Boogie probably starts too, but those guys are going to play and play a lot because I actually asked Quinn at a press conference on Monday evening about Hunter's minutes, and basically he said it's a 1-game scenario. Like, I think everyone will play as much as they can play, and that includes guys who they probably want to keep an eye on most of the time, like Capella and Bogey. Hunter also is another guy like that. Like, they could be playing into the mid-high 30s, maybe in the 40-minute range in this game. Now, that's 5 guys. I would say 2 more guys, Garrison Matthews and Bruno Fernando, are extremely likely to play in the game. They've both been in the rotation for the entirety of the second half of the season, basically. Garrison's been playing almost every game for a long, long time. Bruno is the logical backup center in this matchup. It will surprise me greatly if either of them do not play. So that's 7. Then there might be minutes for Wes Matthews, Mo Gay, or even potentially both of those guys. Wes Matthews is, of course, the old hand. He could guard DeMar DeRozan for a minute in this game. That would not surprise me. He will be relied on to be executing efficiently and effectively. Quinn likes that veteranosity. Coaches like to default to veterans. He's the old hand. It should not surprise anyone if he plays. Mo Gay is a lot more talented and a lot bigger and longer than Wes Matthews, but also is very raw. Has higher upside for sure, but coaches don't often trust rookies with this little experience. He's not been playing much all year long in a play-in setting. But on the other side of things, Mo Gay gives them real stuff that they don't really get anywhere else on the current roster with the options that they have of Jalen and all that stuff. So I can see them try Mo Gay for one stint with a short leash. That wouldn't surprise me, but keep an eye on that as we get going. I tend to think they're probably going to play Trey and DeJounte, one of them, I should say, for the entire game. So that probably limits the amount of exposure that Kobe Buffkin would have in this game. It won't surprise me if he plays, but I think if I had to guess, it's going to be that 7 plus either Matthews or Gay, maybe both. That's kind of a 9, and it will kind of surprise me a little if Kobe plays. It won't shock me by any means, but I think that's more of an insurance policy. But they could use him defensively. Like, let's just say Hunter gets in foul trouble. I'm not saying Buffkin's a great option against DeRozan, but Buffkin's a good defender. He's active. He's long. He's obviously small against a guy like DeRozan, but they could try that. It's a 1-game scenario. Quinn said this. I'll say it now. You don't really have time to adjust in a 1-game scenario. Like, you have to throw the kitchen sink at this one if you're the Hawks. You're trying to stay alive and get to Friday, so that means a little bit of innovation if you have to. The roster is already challenged, but they're going to have to be creative, especially without all of those forwards. If Hunter gets in foul trouble, that's a disaster. They have to kind of pivot from there. You're talking about all the options available to them. So pull all the stops at this point in time, and the Hawks will probably be doing that if I had to guess. All right, we'll have more coming up in a second when it comes to this matchup about the offense, the defense, as well as some stuff on the Kings pick, and my final sort of prediction along with the FanDuel point spread for this contest. But first, a word from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that's pushing a little bit further when you're behind the wheel? Do you ever wonder what adventure might be waiting for you around the next corner when you're driving? Our friends at Nissan have live SUVs with the capabilities to take your next adventure to that next level. The 2024 Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes alike. As a class exclusive, Google built in that you're always updating assistant to call for almost anything when you are behind the wheel. Gone are the days of actually having to connect your phone because Google Assistant, Google Maps, Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system with the Nissan Rogue. A 2024 Nissan Rogue is also a perfect mid-size crossover for your next big adventure. And they have an incredible lineup Nissan as well. It also includes 2024 Nissan Pathfinder, and that seats up to eight people. It has expensive cargo capacity, along with advanced 4x4 capability that's also available for you. They have 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds of towing. And when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is going to be there to answer that call for you. Take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure with Nissan. Shop nissanusa.com. One more time, the place to go is nissanusa.com. Today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go, and I've been told that I'm a really competitive person. I definitely admit that on some level. I have a competitive side for sure. We all do on some degree, of course. And my competitive side is also a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it before, but it's been downloaded over 150 million times. That's a lot of downloads for one app. It's a great space on Monopoly to actually play on not just one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities to bring the big money to you. Plus, the best part, honestly, is being able to mess with your friends when you're in there. You can charge them rent by buying on sort of your own iconic properties, just like the classic Monopoly game as well. I can also rob the vaults of riches for myself in this game. That's always a lot of fun. And leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon happens to be. And it's not just the competitive side that loves Monopoly Go as well. Team up with your friends and people around the world in timed tournaments to earn huge rewards with Monopoly Go. So get into the game and join your friends now by downloading the Monopoly Go app. You can do it now for free on the App Store or Google Play. One more time, download Monopoly Go right now today. All right, to the Hawks offense against the Bulls defense in this matchup. I'll start here. There's a potentially huge advantage for Atlanta at the three-point line in this game. The Hawks are taking about 38 threes per game. That's top 8 in the league in attempts. They haven't shot it incredibly well, but they've been fine all year, and all of their best shooters are still available. Jalen, Onyeka, those guys are huge losses, but shooting-wise, that means more of Bogey and Garrison, and obviously you still have Trey and DeJounte and Hunter. They're going to hunt threes. They should hunt threes in this game. The Bulls allow the most three-point attempts of any team in the league, almost 40 per game. They're also 20th in percentage allowed. You have more control over how many you attempt and how many you make in the NBA, generally speaking, but the Hawks are going to get up threes, in my opinion, in this game. If they make them at a high clip, they'll probably win. There's a strong correlation between three-point shooting and winning with this Hawks team and really across the NBA, and that could be probably the number one X factor is, like, do the Hawks shoot well from three? If they do, you favor them to win. Doesn't mean they're guaranteed to win, but that's one X factor for sure. Also, Chicago's defensive shot profile is not good. Overall, they're bottom 10 in the league in allowing shots at the rim. They, of course, again, allow the most threes per game in the league. They don't allow a lot of floater range and mid-range shots, which are the shots that you don't really want to take anyway. So it could be a little bit challenging for DeJounte in particular because he doesn't like he likes to get to the mid-range. But DeJounte also shouldn't probably have to get the number one attention from Chicago. I think the Bulls are going to load up on Trey, as they probably should. That could leave DeJounte being guarded by Kobe White, and that's an advantageous matchup for the Hawks, in my opinion. So it will depend on what the Bulls do there, but keep an eye on that. The Bulls play a traditional center most of the time if Drummond is available. If not, they'll have to go small. But if Vucevic is playing, that is appetizing for the Hawks in pick and roll, in particular with Trey. It does help the Bulls that they have really good guard pressure in the backcourt, but if Dosunmu moves out, that'll be a little bit lessened. But there are going to be places for the Hawks to attack in this game. I think spread pick and roll will be appetizing for Atlanta in this one the entire way through. It'll create good looks, and there are ways to beat this Bulls defense. Speaking of that pressure, though, ball security will be huge. So after the three-point shooting, I would say taking care of the ball is going to be paramount because the Hawks, number one, are okay at taking care of the ball this year, but the Bulls are very good at creating turnovers. They're top 10 in the league in steals and turnover rate defensively. And the Hawks are bad enough defensively in transition without turning the ball over that they can't really afford to turn the ball over, make it even worse. And the Bulls really rely on creating that havoc with their ball pressure. If you can manage that and navigate it and avoid mistakes, there are definitely ways to beat Chicago. I also think the Bulls could be beaten on the offensive glass in this game. That's not a huge weakness of theirs, but with Capella, who, by the way, led the entire league in offensive rebounds this year by a pretty comfortable margin, that's an area to be potentially highlighted. Of course, Clint is not always the most efficient on those rebounds. That's always worth noting. But if he gets the extra possession, that'd be definitely very important in this game because the Bulls really rely on the possession battle overall. If the Hawks kind of neutralize that, advantage Atlanta. Now, the Bulls are good at getting back defensively in transition, but when they don't get back, they get absolutely hammered. So they're good at percentage of attempts in transition, basically, but they're very bad when teams are actually able to run. They end up scoring very well, and the turnover battle could lead to more of that. So I would say overall, the Hawks should be able to score in this game, especially if Vucevic and Drummond are on the court the entire way. It's very appetizing for the Hawks in spread pick and roll with Trey, and even DeJounte when Trey's off the floor. There's room to operate there. It's just whether shots fall or not. But I think the shot quality for the Hawks should be pretty good in this game. On defense, I'll start with the ugly area, and that is transition. But it is weakness on weakness in this game. The Hawks are in the bottom 4 of the league this year in frequency allowed in transition defensively and also efficiency allowed. They are awful at it. We all know it. We all watch the team regularly that listen to this podcast. And honestly, it's even worse right now with the current personnel. You don't have Jalen. You don't have Onyeka. More of Bogey means more of issues there. Same with Trey. Even smaller Garrison. Bruno, not the greatest getting back on defense. So that's an area where it's a red flag for sure. Fortunately, the Bulls are literally dead last in offensive transition frequency this year, and they're bottom 5 at fast break points. So they did beat the Hawks a little bit there in the regular season, but in general, playoff/play-in basketball is going to be a little bit slower, and the Bulls don't love to run. So that could neutralize the Hawks' number 1, I would say, defensive mishap. So that's an area of encouragement there. The Bulls are good at creating shots overall, meaning that they're basically really good in the possession battle. So, number 1, the Bulls don't turn the ball over very much. They're actually 3rd in the league in turnover rate. That's actually excellent. The Hawks are pretty good at creating turnovers this year, actually. It's been a notable change from the previous regime. They do get more pressure on the perimeter, but they can't rely on that too much here because the Bulls take care of the ball at a good level. Rebounding-wise, if Drummond plays, keeping him off the glass is huge. That's his number 1 strength by far. He can kind of beat you in one stint by just dominating there. You got to avoid that. Free throws are not a huge concern defensively outside of DeRozan. So Quinn even made a joke to me in my question on Monday about how DeMar kind of laughed about DeMar's free throw creation. He's one of the best in the league, getting in the line about 8 times per game. That's a ton of attempts. It might even be higher than that in a play-in situation. They can't afford that. But he's kind of the only guy that really puts a ton of pressure on you there. Speaking of which, they absolutely cannot afford foul trouble for DeAndre Hunter in this game. Also, Capella, although he's a very low foul player, they can't really afford to be without him either because while Bruno is in some ways a more effective offensive player than Clint is, other than rebounding, Clint's defense is leaps and bounds better than Bruno's, and they're going to need that in this game. But Hunter's the one for sure. There's just no other options. The biggest reason is that, again, no other options, but also DeRozan is a primary assignment that Hunter's going to have. They don't have great options there in general. Like, if something happens to Hunter and they got to take him off the floor, you got Wes Matthews. Bogey is physical, and DeMar is not the best explosive athlete at this point in his career, so maybe Bogey would bother him a little bit, but DeJounte is probably too small, so is Kobe. There are not fantastic options against DeMar. So keeping Hunter on the court, not only just for the fact that he's their best guy on the wing in general and at the forward spot right now, but just this matchup, they got to have him on the floor. Basically, Hunter isn't a huge foul guy, but he's gotten some more fouls late in the year at times, and he doesn't get the best whistle, generally speaking. So keeping an eye on that is very, very important. Otherwise, you got Garrison Matthews trying to guard DeMar DeRozan, and that's trouble for everybody involved. I did share this with Jason on the show yesterday, but just to reiterate it a little bit, DeRozan has really killed the Hawks for a long time now. Since he got to Chicago 3 years ago, he's averaging 28 points a game against the Hawks. He's averaged at least 27 points per game in every season over the last 4 against Atlanta. 28, 27, 28, 29 and a half with good efficiency numbers. He's very good, but he's not been that good against everybody on the whole. He's had the Hawks number, and I will say this as well. The biggest sort of swing factor is kind of what you believe here about the clutch, quote-unquote, situations. The Bulls this year have been incredible in the clutch for whatever reason. They're 27-17 in clutch games. They're 12-26 in games that are not clutch games. They're second best in the entire league in clutch net rating, which means they win close games. They pull them out of the fire. A lot of that's DeMar, who's the favorite probably for clutch player of the year this year. Part of that, I will have to say, is good luck. You have to run really good, really positive, really fortunate to have that kind of run. But DeMar is a good player in that situation. The Hawks, by the way, have been pretty bad in the clutch this year. They're 26th in clutch net rating. So if it gets close, that's a little bit of danger. But I am personally inclined to kind of wave that away a little because I don't think it's that indicative of these teams' quality. But I just keep that in mind. It's a game that's in Chicago. That's an advantage for the home team, of course. Plus, they've been really good at those close games. So if the Hawks are going to win, maybe a little bit more comfort would be ideal in this situation, but an area there to focus on. I'll have a final kind of pick or whatever at the end of this quick detour, but because this just happened, I have to get to this quickly. The Kings won tonight. And you might be wondering, if you're a more casual observer, don't want to know what's going on here, why that matters to the Hawks. But essentially, the Kings owe their first-round pick to the Hawks this year. And I literally waited until 1 a.m. or so to record this podcast explicitly because the Kings are playing tonight, or were playing tonight. It's as simple as this. If the Kings make the playoffs, and that's the 8-team playoffs, the Hawks get their pick. If they don't make the playoffs, the pick rolls over to 2025. So if the Kings lost tonight, it was going to be over. It's a wrap for 24. They would have kept their pick, but they won. So now it's going to be all eyes on Friday. The Kings play the Pelicans in New Orleans on Friday. There's a chance that Zion, who left the game today, could be a little bit banged up or not even playing that game. We won't know that for a while, but let's just say the road has opened up a little bit for the Kings. Not only did they win tonight, but they have for me, a relatively friendly matchup against New Orleans. Although it's on the road, they'll be underdogs, but there you go. If the Kings win, the Hawks get their pick, and it'll be somewhere in the 15, 16, 17 range this year. If the Kings lose, it rolls over to next year. We'll have another year of fodder about that. So keep an eye on that. There is a debate on Hawks land about whether they actually want to keep the pick or not. I think it's pretty close. The short version is basically that if you roll it over, you have higher upside. The pick protections lessen the next 2 years. There's better drafts probably the next 2 years. I get that. Unfortunately, though, there's more downside because eventually, if the pick never conveys, it becomes 2 second-round picks, which have a lot less value in a vacuum than the first-round pick. On the more positive side, if you get the pick this year, there's that safety, like you know where the pick is, and it's pretty good. 15, 16, 17 is a good pick. Yes, in a bad draft, but in the middle of the draft, not as much of an impact as would have been at the top of the draft. So I'm not telling anybody what to think. I personally would lean slightly to preferring it now because of how certain it is to be a top 17 pick. There's some value in that, especially when you could get a situation at the end of this where you might not have it at all. And if it became unprotected, I would say roll it over. But it never becomes more than top 10 protected. So the absolute peak this pick could ever be is 11th. If you can guarantee 16 now, that isn't a bad swap. But that's kind of my opinion. I won't tell anybody else how to feel. That's kind of the situation. We'll have more on that later on because Friday is obviously the Hawks. If they win Wednesday, the Hawks will be playing Friday, and we'll focus on that and more so. But the immediate impact of that pick is pretty interesting. So at least we'll touch on that at the end of this. So back to the game quickly, and then we'll move on to my crossover with the Locked On Bulls guys. So basically, what's going to decide this game? I would say to kind of whittle it down a little bit here, the good side for the Hawks would be if they don't have disasters in transition. If they hold DeRozan to a reasonable performance, not a great one, if they negate the possession battle, like don't get killed on the glass or in turnover battle, and again, it's obvious, but it's also true, make threes. If they make threes, I'm confident they're probably going to win. If they don't, it gets a little bit more dicey. If you're the Bulls, you want to get DeRozan loose, keeping Trey in sort of locked in. I could do way longer on this, but in previous years, Trey has killed the Bulls. This year, he's not actually done very well against the Bulls. On paper, a team playing a drop center like Vucevic or Drummond is food for Trey, and even DeJounte when Trey sits. We'll see. And Trey's got the brace. He's still still favoring the hand a little bit. We'll see how that all plays out, but that's an area to obviously circle. If Trey's really good, the Hawks have a huge advantage in this game. If not, then it becomes more dicey. And then just physically, like both teams are small, but that physicality for the Hawks right now with their available personnel is going to be a challenge. It's on the road. It'll be a raucous atmosphere. That's a sellout crowd for sure in Chicago, and we'll see how the Hawks respond to all of that. Big picture, our friends at FanDuel make the Hawks 3-point underdogs in this game. The Hawks, by the way, were the single worst team in the NBA against the spread this year, and one of the worst in recent memory. They were 29-53 against the spread. That is 5 games worse than any other team in the league. That is brutal. But you'll hear at the end of the show when I talk to Haize and Pat of Locked On Bulls. But if you make me sort of pick the game right now, I would probably take the Hawks. Now, I would not tell you that. If you're a new listener, I'm not someone who's going to tell you that for fun. I actually believe it. I have to believe it or I won't say it. It comes down to me this. Number one, I won't try to tell you. It's a 50-50 game. I think this is a very much a coin flip game. If it was in Atlanta, I would flat out pick the Hawks. In Chicago, it's closer, 50-50. I would still lean Atlanta for kind of 2 reasons. Number one, I think the Hawks are, at least they have the top-end talent advantage in this game. If you line up the best 5 on both sides, I think the Hawks' best 5 is better than the Bulls' best 5 available players in this game. Now, you could argue, and I would, the drop-off from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8 might favor Chicago. We'll see. But I think Trey's the best player in the game. If you want to call Trey and DeMar a wash, then you would say DeJounte is the next best player, I would say. Bogey is high on the list compared to your Caruso's or whoever you want to say. So again, I think that the top end best 5 versus best 5, I lean to Atlanta, and I also lean slightly at least to Quinn over Billy Donovan in this scenario, just experience wise, all that stuff. So it's a road game that kind of makes it more difficult. I would lean Atlanta, but look, nothing will surprise me. This is a battle between 2 very mediocre teams this year. That's just the reality of the situation. We'll get into that more in a second after a break to hear from our sponsors and talk about the crossover with the Bulls guys. But as I sign off here for the final time, just by myself, it should be an interesting game. It'll be interesting to see how all teams on all sides respond, all players respond, how top-end talent fares on both sides. But I'm expecting a close game, honestly, if I had to guess, and we'll see who pulls it out in the end. And as always, I'll have a full breakdown after the game is over. And then if the Hawks win, it'll be on to either Philly or Miami. And then it'll be from there. If they lose, we'll get into off-season mode. And by the way, we never go away on this podcast. So please stay tuned. Please subscribe to the podcast. And after a quick break, from our sponsors, I'll be back with more on crossover fashion with the folks at Locked On Bulls. But first, here's a word from our sponsors. Today's show is brought to you by eBay Motors, and passion driving patience are the winning formula when it comes to winning championships as well as keeping your ride or die alive. eBay Motors actually has everything that you're looking for to maintain your vehicle. Also level it up to peak performance. They have roof racks and exhaust kits and LED headlights, superchargers, and much more. Whether you are into speed, power, or style when it comes to your vehicle, eBay Motors is going to have you covered across the board. They have over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for at eBay Motors. They also have eBay Guaranteed Fit, so your part is guaranteed to fit your ride the first time, every time, or your money's coming back to you. Because with eBay Motors, you are burning rubber, but you are not, crucially, burning any cash at all. With the parts that you need at the price that you're looking for, it's easy to turn that car into the MVP and bring home that win that you are seeking. And that championships are always important, and that comes the same way with your vehicle. Keep your ride or die alive right now at ebaymotors.com. One more time, the place to go is ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply.
And as the Chicago Bulls are preparing to face off against the Atlanta Hawks in the 9-10 spot in the play-in match, we are welcoming on the host of Locked On Hawks in the building. What's going on, man?
I'm good, guys. I know we're all excited for 9-10 basketball, aren't we? Everybody's fired up.
Yeah, of course. You know, it's exciting, right? It gets the people going. It's provocative.
It's one word for it. I think I'd use a different one, but that is absolutely one word for it. I mean, listen, it's I said this when the play-in started. I dislike the play-in because I think it has devalued the 7th and 8th seed completely. Not that you were like beating your chest if you were a 7th or 8th seed, but I can't argue with the results, dog. Like, it's entertaining every time, and I feel like it's the worst thing in the world because, especially with Bulls and Hawks, I know it's going to be a competitive game.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun game, right? It's always really fun when the Bulls and Hawks face off against each other. Now, I think the Bulls going in with the injuries that they may be going in with may make it a little bit less interesting in our favor, though. Right. But I think it's going to be a fun game regardless.
Yeah, the Hawks are the same way. I was going to say, I mean, the Hawks are banged up too, beyond belief. Like so it's a walking wounded matchup.
Let me ask you this, right? With the Hawks right now coming into this, you spent a lot of time dealing with DeJounte Murray being the lead guy with Trae Young out. Is there any concern, Brad, from you that maybe trying to work that back in at this point is going to affect them heading into this game?
I think maybe a little bit. They did try. I think one of the reasons they played their guys more than they probably needed to at the last couple of games at the end of the season was to have those guys play together. Trae had been gone for so long that even though the games didn't mean anything, they were pretty open. Like we need our starters to play together. Some they looked okay. They got blown out the last game, but the two games before that they looked all right. And DeJounte's done a good job to his credit. Like when Trae was out, he took the huge workload that he had to take. He was taking 25 shots a game, 30 shots a game sometimes, and then he's been willing and able to slide into that number 2 role. He can still turn it up. I mean, we've seen that, especially if the Bulls throw the kitchen sink at Trae, DeJounte will willingly and capably take up more usage. And he's done a good job this year just taking more threes, like being more of an off-ball threat. I think ideally those guys are not the best pairing in the world together, but they can play together. I think you kind of seen DeJounte be even maybe a little bit more comfortable with it when he's by himself, but they've made it work at times. It's not worked perfectly, as I'm sure everybody knows. This is a 9-10 preview, so it hasn't worked that well. But I think that they're at least comfortable with it, and it's been, they played 3 games together at the end of the year now, so it's like kind of getting back into their hand in glove the way it used to be.
Brad, when you look at where your team, or what do you want to see from your team outside of making it further in the play-in or anything, do you think is this going to be the wake-up call for your team to make some changes to the roster? Do you expect them to kind of keep things the same? Are you like us? Because we look at the Bulls roster, and we're just waiting on our president of basketball operations to try to sell us on why we're in the right spot at being the 9th seed, and they're going to try to run this back. How do you feel about the future of the Hawks roster?
Yeah, that does sound familiar. The Hawks did this, though, exact same thing last year, right? So last year they were in the play and they got out of it. They were competitive-ish against Boston in the first round. They won 2 games, and then they ran it back, basically. But at least last year they had an excuse. It was Quinn Snyder's. He came in midseason. It was really strange.
Yep.
And they basically said, without saying, that Quinn's our big addition. Like, we're going to kind of go with continuity and all that stuff. Obviously, that didn't work out so well this year. So I do think the Hawks are going to, famous last words, actually make some changes. Like, they came close to trading DeJounte at the deadline. They came close to doing some other stuff. They kind of held pat. I think that the wake-up call phrase is a good one. Like, that's one I've used in my show too. It's like, you would hope, I would say from a fan perspective, like, you would hope that the 3rd straight year in the play-in, you wouldn't be satisfied with that, especially for a team that the previous year to that went to the conference finals.
Yeah.
So I think they're going to make some changes finally. Part of that might be money too, but I honestly don't want to see the reaction. Well, maybe I do want to see the reaction. It'd probably be good for my numbers on the show if they didn't. if they didn't do anything at all, people would be very mad. Does that make? Yeah. I'm sure that's the same thing for you guys. Like, if they just run it back again, it's like, what are we even doing here?
Well, I think now the problem with Bulls fans is we've just we're resigned to it. We're almost apathetic to it at this point, where it's like continuity. Now we're up to competitive, right? We went from continuity to now, we're trying to be competitive. And I guess that's the 9th seed in the play-in tournament. But I think the one thing that we've talked about on this show is, do you want Atlanta to advance? Do you want Atlanta to get to the next round? Are you hoping that the Bulls put you out of your misery on how this season has been? Because I think, for me, I don't want my team to lose, but I know the benefits that come to it if we do lose, and maybe there could be a change in what we see on the court. And winning is the worst thing, because it's going to give hope.
Yeah, I can really see both sides, because on one hand, like, the Hawks weren't supposed to make the run they made before. Like, I think there's something deep in me and deep in some fans that's like, they can get out of the play-in, and I'm not saying they're going to beat Boston, don't get me wrong, but like, they beat Boston twice in March, and fans decided that not. In fact, I keep hearing that. You think it's funny. Hawks fans, at least some of them are like, we own the Celtics, so we're definitely going to push them in the first round of the play. And I'm like, I wouldn't go that far. I can see both sides. Basically, like, there's an opportunity if you get into a series against Boston, for instance, you're probably not going to win it, but it's experience for your young guys. I wish Jalen Johnson was healthy, because that would have been like, hey, this is one of our guys, playoff experience, all that stuff. On the other hand, like, there's also draft components. You guys know this too, I'm sure, but like, your draft pick, if you lose the first playing game, you're picking 10 or 11. You make the playoffs, you're picking 15, 16. Yeah. Is that a huge difference? No, but it's some value in the draft. And look, like we just said, do you trick yourself into thinking that this matters? Because I think, honestly, either one of these teams could beat the Heat on Friday. Like, would it surprise you if they look, the Heat or the Heat? They kind of do Heat stuff, but it's not like they're going to be a huge underdog against a not that great Miami team this year on Friday. Again, they'd be underdogs, but it's like, it doesn't take that much to squint and kind of see it. So I honestly understand both schools of thought. I've heard from Hawks fans, it's like, I'm not saying it's split down the middle, but it really is like, some people are like, get this thing over with. I'm done with this season. Just lose. And then there's others that are like, let's push Boston. And I don't have a firm opinion. It's kind of like, I understand. I'm kind of like nodding along on both sides. It's like, yeah, I kind of get it. But some fans, like you said, you don't want to root against your team. And I'm not going to tell people they have to. You know what I mean? It's like, do what you want to do. I'll just tell you that, like, if they lose, there is an upside to that with regard to not only waking up, but also for the draft side. So, like, there's a little bit of spin. If they lose tomorrow night, I'll come on the show and be like, hey, guys, pick and test in the draft. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know.
Right.
What are you going to say?
Pay no attention for all the viewers back home that saw my wife grabbing beers out of the refrigerator.
No, but
it's late. It's late at night, guys. It's late at night.
It's late at night. She's preparing for the playing game tomorrow, too. You got to start drinking today to watch a 9-10 play-in matchup.
But no, I agree 100%. I think that's kind of where I am with the Bulls. So I never want to root against my team, but there are benefits to us not making it out the play-in, and benefits that we need for a team that is lacking talent and that needs that. And having a higher pick can help you get that talent. Now, I guess in this draft as well, this is not the draft you necessarily you can get comparable talent. I think anywhere from pick 6 to about pick 15, there's comparable talent all in that area. But at the same time, because of how much we've been dealing with over the last 3 years, I'm not going to work. I'm not going to even lie to you guys. I'm just ready for it to be over with this year. I'm just ready for it to be over.
I feel you on that, dog. But there is this team. I think the components of it make it very difficult, right? We've never seen somebody on either one of these teams. I guess maybe you a little bit with the Trey run to the conference finals, but like it seems a lot more difficult with the current teams that we have to see a team go on a run. Not Miami Heat, right? But where you say maybe you knock off one of the power conferences in the playoffs and all of a sudden things kind of open up. You see that surprise. I think it's looking at the Hawks, looking at the Bulls, both teams coming into this matchup and really how both teams have played, right? Like I'll say this, at least for the Bulls, I feel like they can defend with anybody. The Bulls' problem is they don't shoot enough threes. They don't attack the paint enough. They don't put enough shots, and they don't have enough size. So, basketball. But with the Hawks, it's like the Hawks just sometimes don't try defensively. And I think that's one of the most confusing things that I've seen this season. Like when Luka goes off on them, or right when why can't I think of a boy from freaking Indiana?
Halliburton.
Yeah. Tyrese Halliburton goes off. It's like, hey, do something. Like you got DeJounte Murray. Do something to try and slow this down.
Yeah, it's I really like defense. So it's been a hard season for me to cover. Like I'm known as like I value defense guy, and it's like if that's your brand and you're trying to watch this Hawks team every night, it is kind of a tough sell, to be honest with you. But there is some upside, like you said. I mean, you can squint and be like, okay, Trae Young is the best player on the floor in a lot of different games and series and things. And if he catches fire, and we have seen it, it was 3 years ago, but I've seen it. It happened. But even then, it's like this is still a team that won 36 games. It's not. It's hard on that side to be like really invested in as far as like a long playoff run to go for sure.
As once said by Danny Green about the Chicago Bears, they are who we thought they were.
That's what that is the best way to sum up this 9-10 matchup.
Hey, bro, I mean, like it's going to be a competitive. Yeah, I mean that's kind of how this game.
That was a game. Yeah. Playing games today have been pretty entertaining. So you never know.
Before we get out of here, what are y'all predictions? What do y'all think is going to happen tomorrow? You got a dub for the Hawks or a dub for the Bulls, Brad?
I think we should all stay on brand. I'm going to say a narrow Hawks win, which makes no sense at all because Chicago is incredible in close games. That's why they're here. You know what I mean? They wouldn't even be here if they weren't incredible in close games. But just at the risk of being yelled at out of my city, I will say Hawks close. But genuinely, it's a toss-up game. That's not a sexy opinion, but it really feels like it's a coin flip game to me. It really does.
What you got, Haize?
It comes down to who's able to step up defensively at the right times and how the Bulls can overcome the size disadvantage. But I'll tell you what, if Ayo Dosunmu is playing in that game, it makes it a lot easier to pick the Bulls. So I'm going to say that the Bulls do get a victory over the Hawks in this one. I'm not gonna do any type of points prediction because with these two teams, you just never know.
That's a wise choice. Yeah,
it could be a 130, 126 game, or it could be a 98 to 95 game. You really never know. My gut feeling, and I got to stick with it. And I've said this the last couple of days leading up to this. I think me and Haize are about to be fuming about pick and roll defense that the Bulls have never been able to play. As the Bulls take a loss in this game. I think that Clint Capella and Trae Young are about to run pick and roll over and over and over and over again. And we're going to be sitting here just going, Vooch is very bad in pick and roll. And you're going to have a lot of possessions where Javonte Green is guarding your 7-footer. So unfortunately, I love the idea to stay on brand. I don't care if people yell at me. You should see Twitter today. They're going off on me.
Bro, you've had Bears fans and they
hot. Didn't even watch the full video, bro. Didn't even watch the whole thing. Just watch the 1-minute clip and they're losing their minds. It's like
they just read I'm telling you this, they didn't even do that. They just read the description that you had in the tweet. They didn't even. But anyway.
It is nice to be able to go onto a social media site and just ruin people's day by telling them the truth. But hey, I think the Bulls take a loss in this one. I think it's a close game, but I do think we'll be talking about a final possession where the Bulls are trying to overcompensate for Vooch's lack of pick and roll defense, and Trae Young knocks down a easy 3. So
I can see it.
All right. Well, anything left, fellas, before we get out of here?
Let's get out of this season.
I appreciate y'all having me. This I guess therapy session. Can we call it that? I'm not even sure what.
You know what?
This was.
And with all that said,
BetterHelp a sponsor today? Is BetterHelp on this?
We'll probably be here again next year doing the same thing.
Oh God, please no.